Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here is your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another conversation in the weekly People in Fundraising nonprofit podcast series. Today is Wednesday, September 24th, 2025, and I'm very excited to welcome Valerie Anastasio to this podcast. Valerie is a longtime prospect research, prospect management leader in the Boston area and was recognized by NEDRA, one of the largest Apra chapters, in 2008 with their annual Ann Castle Award, which honors outstanding service to the prospect development profession. And I just thought it'd be so great to have you as a guest, Valerie, given the breadth of your knowledge in this industry and what you have seen in terms of changes over time, and just sharing about you as a longtime prospect research, prospect management chapter leader and volunteer as well. So thank you for making time today.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. And if you could please just tell us quickly, Valerie, are you joining us from the Boston area? What are you up to these days professionally? Then we'll get into the questions.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm coming from my home in Holliston, Massachusetts, which is just about 30 miles out of Boston, a little south and west. And I'm here in my home office, which also doubles as my music room. There's a piano behind me.
Nice.
So I have, as you mentioned, a really long career in the Boston area with some pretty large nonprofits here. I've been really fortunate to practice the prospect research and prospect development in frameworks that are really varied from large to small organizations. And some of them include Harvard University, where I was the director of development research, and Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Mm-hmm. And then most recently, I spent actually at Museum of Fine Arts. I was there for a decade. I was part of the team that built out the American Wing. Okay. At the hospital, at the museum, excuse me. And then eventually landed at the Boston Children's Hospital Trust, which is the primary funding vehicle for Boston Children's Hospital. I was there for about 11 and a half years, just wrapped up my tenure there at the beginning of May this year. And there's an incredible team there that I had the privilege of working with over a campaign and preparations for the next one. Because as you know, hospitals are always thinking about a campaign or in a campaign, just like many of the large nonprofits. So I've really been able to see, in terms of my scope, a lot of different types of nonprofits in different areas, different sectors. And in my consulting work as well, which has given me a lot of fodder for understanding the world, at least, and makes it sort of fascinating to hear other people's experiences that have depths of knowledge. So I am a late career professional, and after moving on from children's, I've really been spending my time thinking pretty deeply about some of the work that I started doing about 5 years ago as a volunteer for NEDRA. And that was looking really deeply at the financial services sector and alternative asset management, and looking at the increasing financialization of our lives and of our lives as philanthropists. So especially focused as a nonprofit researcher on ultra high net worth and high net worth individuals, and understanding the gap in understanding and level of conversancy with individuals in those professions, and how that could impact our efficacy in developing strategies for individuals who are in those fields, or for individuals that benefit from individuals in those fields, because it has it's a very different kind of approach to the world when you make a career in finance, and that can really color how you think about any and all of your spending and your career and how you accumulate wealth and manage it. So increasingly, I've been sort of fascinated by that because as a prospect researcher, we spend most of our time talking about people who have capacity to do really significant things. And it turns out they are, quite different than where we are. And can we maximize our effectiveness with them when we understand them better? So, so thinking really deeply about that, I've developed a number of course curriculums that I offered through NEDRA for a long time, and now I instruct and coach privately and do other kind of consulting work. So that's where I'm at right now.
Wonderful, thank you. And I have a couple of follow-ups. I think for people in our network, I would strongly encourage you, if those topics that Valerie just talked about, ultra high net worth individuals who think differently, they have access to networks of like-minded folks, mostly, pretty financially savvier than the average person as well. Definitely, please, if I can make a plug, please follow Valerie on LinkedIn, because you talk quite a bit there on these topics. I've seen your content there where you're linking to articles, you've got charts, and it's really very topical. And again, I just think it's a good service for following you for people that want to learn more about those topics.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. And one of the things that I've learned as I've started to get more deeply into this, and I actually started talking about this right around this is how old I am. I think 2002 or 2003 was the first time I ever did a workshop on alternative assets, because at the time, right around that turn, there was this explosion of hedge funds and nobody could figure out what they were about, right? Yeah. And I wound up offering a half-day workshop on them that was really well attended just for NEDRA. I was surprised at how many people came in. Mm-hmm. I think one of the great values of being able to share what I've learned is that there's so much jargon and it feels so inaccessible to people. And even now there's such a proliferation of information. It's hard to find entry points into that content and understand what's valuable and what's really important to know if you're on the fundraising side. Yeah. So for those of us who have been in fundraising for a long time and have developed a familiarity and an understanding of those worlds, I think that's the kind of the space that I occupy is, I'm a safe space. You can trust me. I'm not going to snell you with jargon, or I'm going to be able to help you understand why this is important or that isn't. And, if there's anything, we'll kind of round out our discussion, I think, about trends for the future. But I think that there's anything that we as prospect development professionals can provide to the fundraising field, it's a deeper and better understanding and knowledge and guidance around those kinds of topics, because they are a little difficult to penetrate. They do take a little bit of time, but it's very helpful to have that kind of domain expertise at hand, internally in fundraising organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were talking, Valerie, I was thinking definitely has professional implications for people that are in prospect development. But
great point.
So personally, I was at Fidelity 2 weeks ago that said they're going to open up their retirement accounts to alternative asset vehicles.
Yes, they are.
Their everyday clients because of
yes, they are.
regulation changes.
Right.
And so in my day job, my employer has an account that they help manage and I contribute to it. And so I asked my advisor, do I have access to this new investment vehicle? And he said, as the institutional company, yes, but it's up to the employer if they want to give their regular customers like me those very complicated, high risk, high reward investment vehicles, like alternative assets. And so we're going to hear a lot more about it in our profession and in our personal lives.
We absolutely are, right. And the reason why there's been this push, not to just completely get off on a tangent, Tim, but if you come and talk to me, this is the kind of stuff you'll learn. The reason why they're doing that, okay, has been because there's been this enormous shrinkage in the opportunity in public markets, right? So the number of publicly traded firms in the US is about 3,700 now. It's collapsed uh, dramatically in the past 30 years, which means that the average institutional investor, if they're only able through their 401k or their investment funds to make investments in public markets, they're only entitled or they're only able to be exposed to a certain level of growth in those markets. And what's happened over the past 30 years, and what I talk about in some of my courses, is that alternative assets, private equity, hedge funds, cryptocurrency, these other forms of investing and working a financial market, derivatives, other things that are kind of outside the scope of what normal consumers are protected from. They're shielded because they're high risk. But as time goes on, more and more of those alternative investment industries have matured to the point where there's not as much risk as there might be, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. So people like Fidelity, organizations like Fidelity are saying, look, we have people who want a level of that exposure, and you can't necessarily say that they're as volatile. Some quarters of it are, but some of them are not. And Fidelity itself has done a really interesting study on Bitcoin and the fact that how its volatility has started to smooth out. They make comparisons to gold, right? I mean, Bitcoin is like a 16-year-old gold. Gold is, 2,000 years old.
Yes.
Bitcoin is 16 years old, right? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of recognition, and the regulators federally have said, okay, we can start to open you up to these businesses and provide those funds. And it's really necessary because there has been, and what's important to understand from the point of view of prospect development professionals is that for the average investor, that kind of growth and gain has not been part of what we've been able to enjoy. But if you are an individual in a particular type of business and you have that kind of access because you're a limited partner or a general partner in a fund, and you're able to manage your assets and your participation, which you're allowed to have, right? You have become much more financially capacious.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily something that is easily tracked or picked up in other ways, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the piece that when I say to people, think differently, you have to understand their world a little bit, because once you start to understand it, you can think a bit differently about the opportunity that's there and what it's going to take to capture philanthropy from them. And that's just a conversation that I've, it's my own personal mission now, since, I really feel like I was materially changed by studying this information the way that I have. And that in terms of service, that this was an area of conversation that I just feel like, needs to be elevated, and that we all really can benefit from, and that we leave opportunities on the table if we're not thinking more strategically and incorporating more of this understanding.
Definitely, and thank you for that. A little bit, you did a great job articulating the breadth of your institutional experience with private higher education, culture and arts, and then rounding out the institutional side of your career with hospital healthcare philanthropy. I'm very curious to know how you entered the fundraising.
I came in initially, I was trained as a musician and I had a liberal arts background, but I came in initially because I was interested in arts patronage. And this was like the late 80s, early 90s. I was looking for, in Massachusetts, looking for positions with grant making organizations, corporate giving programs, foundations. And at that time, Boston was a pretty closed community socially, especially among philanthropy. I mean, even now I think it's still a little, cliquey and clubby, depending on what corners of the city you're in. But definitely after informationally interviewing, I discovered that those kinds entry-level jobs with those kinds of organizations typically went to internal people in the companies or people who knew people. If you were not kind of part of the general flow of that, personal relationships, they really weren't that open to you. So I had to look to the grant seeking side, my information. I don't remember who actually suggested prospect research as a path for me. Probably somebody during my informational interviewing days. But my first job as a prospect researcher was at Brandeis University. I was hired by Judy Rotenberg, who had a Master of Library Science.
Oh,
And her and Jim Levinson ran the department at Brandeis, and Jim was a magnificent person. He might have also had an MLS, but he just had an encyclopedic memory and an incredible institutional memory, and they were remarkable people and remarkable trainers in terms of really thinking critically about sources, looking around corners, understanding how information was organized, and how things might show up. And
sure.
so I couldn't have had a better introduction to the
Awesome.
field.
Awesome. I'm glad you mentioned Judy. I think it's also an Ann Castle Award recipient, maybe one of the first.
He was the first.
She was the first. Okay, great.
She
Thank you.
was.
And this goes back 10 years ago. I was on a NEDRA, some type of committee, and it's like, oh, you should interview just people in the community. And we reached out to Judy, and I think she was enjoying retirement, so didn't hear back. But things like that were kind of breadcrumbs that led me in time to think about what has now become this podcast. So
Wow.
it's just nice to hear. You mentioned some very familiar names, people that had an impact on the profession, on NEDRA, and in this case, on your career growth too. So thank you.
Yeah.
With that institutional experience, the breadth of your career responsibilities, that led me to think about this next question. And then it's a little bit of a long quote, but it's from an HBR, Harvard Business Review article in the fall of 2019 that said, quote, "When I make clear to my employees that I want them to consider all career options, they see that I'm genuinely committed to helping them learn and grow. If I think they've gotten to the top of their learning curve on my particular team, and I can't figure out how to help them grow within, I will support their efforts to get a job elsewhere," end quote. And I know you've been a longtime manager of prospect research, prospect development teams. Have you experienced what the author of that article was talking about in these situations with staff? And if so, how might you have either led out on those conversations, kind of proactively seeing that they have talent, but we don't have the opportunity for them to continue? Or maybe they've come to you and asked, as their manager, as someone who's been in the industry for the length of time you were, anything come to mind about that and managing individuals?
Sure. So I have had this experience. Career advancement, after having managed teams for a while and individuals on teams and over several years, right? Over 8, 9 years. I've come to appreciate how deeply personal career advancement really is, right? How much it requires of the person. It's a very, very individualized process. It depends on a person's personality, their ambition, and even most importantly, the kind of the moment they're in during their lives, because it requires a lot of emotional growth, right? So a person might really want to advance, but even internally they're not ready, or there's, in the balance of their life makes it sort of difficult to do, but there's that emotional growth that has to come along with just, hitting the marks, or kind of going, beyond the call of duty around this kind of thing or other. And so, but generally, as a manager, what I've tried to do is get out of people's way, give people the opportunity to work in the job, but also on the job, to have some kind of layer where they're able to continue to kind of work and refine what they're doing, so that they can first, continue to add value to the organization themselves, and secondly, so that they can create the kind of value that makes them eligible internally for a promotion, so I can go to bat for them,
Yeah.
or for a higher level position elsewhere, to just work on that readiness for whatever the next thing is.
Mhm.
And those who have left my teams have always had my wholehearted and excited support. I'm very happy. I'm sad when people leave, but I'm happy when
Sure.
people leave, because sometimes people have to leave in order to get right the next thing. So,
Yes.
um, but I would say that as a prospect researcher, and folks in operations generally, and in particular records managers and prospect researchers, those of us who do really deep, detailed work that requires a lot of focus and introspection, I have found that what's more challenging, in a place where I haven't been this successful, I think, is when a longstanding member of the team, who's been an incredible individual contributor, aspires or feels ready to move up a level, into a management position,
Oh,
or
yeah.
become a project lead. But where that larger role, really everybody agrees, would have an enormous impact on the organization. Like if
Sure.
somebody were to rise up and do that kind of thing, it would really actually be incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
But where that function requires more of an executive presence from that individual, which is different than the persona that the person has come to be known for, or cultivated, or was successful in for so long, right?
Mm.
So aspiring to that requires that person to change
Yeah.
in ways that are really challenging. And it can be really hard to talk about that. And as a manager, I have struggled with that. And I don't know if I've necessarily figured out just how to support the growth within a person who, has the vision, the will, and the vision, but maybe not those kinds of skills that are different than what they've been successful with now, and are really, really necessary, especially because they have to be seen by other individuals, beyond their immediate team, as having the right presence for that new role.
Yeah.
So that's really hard. It's a really hard discussion to have. Obviously none of us are trained to have that kind of coaching discussion with people, but I guess that's
Sure.
why there are coaches.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate and can resonate with some of the specifics you talked about, the emotional readiness. That was certainly true for me. I've felt that at various points in my career, where I would look around and see, okay, well, they started out kind of the same level, same time as I did, and now they're managing a few junior prospect analysts, and
Yeah.
I'm not advancing. And why is that? And I don't think I had the wherewithal earlier in my career to understand the second point you talked about really well there, Valerie, about having a different persona and being seen as an executive, as a leader, not just within that prospect research team, or the pipeline management team, what have you, but being seen by the other, who would then be your peers, around the executive roundtable. And I think I pursued opportunities, or had opportunities come to me, where it's like, oh, you could do this, you could manage a team. And you there were times when, like as you said, the will, the ambition, the hunger was there, but maybe the personality wasn't there, or circumstances outside of work were really tricky to take on something like that. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, that you may have the will, you may have, the vision, but does everything align in all areas for that to be a successful next step?
Right. And to say, it's not wrong that you are who you are. You've
Right.
been successful as this person, but, like it or not, we're in the fundraising field and, operational roles are seen as support roles, right? I mean, you can be very successful in operations, especially at earlier parts of this career path, just being a standout person doing your job, right? Being a
Yes.
standout individual contributor, and sometimes the farther you lean into that, the less that you lean out to some of those things that actually mean more in the advancement side. And
Yeah.
if you catch that early enough in your career, you can kind of, you can manage it. I think it's in those instances where people have had really, years and years of service within an organization, that developing that new persona and
Yes.
giving people a chance to see them rise out of that into something else. And not everybody is really actually comfortable with that, either.
Sure.
They get into it and then they realize, oh gosh, I really don't like this. I'm
Right.
uncomfortable, but I told everybody that I wanted to do this. And,
Yeah.
now you're in that quandary. So, it's a delicate balance. And, I think I tried always as a manager to be somebody who was, wanted people to come back to me and say, maybe not, breaking out over here, because that's okay, from me, I don't always know if I necessarily gave off enough of that vibe, but I
Mhm.
was always there for people. So,
That's wonderful. Yes. And I think the same may apply, with volunteering, being a volunteer leader, whether it's with NEDRA, AASP, Apra, um, you know, I think whether it's your day-to-day job or wanting to contribute to the betterment of that professional community, I think some of those same principles apply, and they can kind of freak out too, like what have I got myself into? So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. That was very enlightening responses to that quote. I have another quote here, and I think maybe I'll preface this one, which I didn't do the last time. I'm going to preface this quote. It's question 3 by saying, I know that outside of work, you have been a singer with a duo, Valerie and Tim, um, and you have several CDs of musical output. And it made me think about this quote. I've never used this in the 150 plus interviews I've done before, but I thought you might be the special guest to connect the quote to your lived experience. So it comes from Judy Garland. I really only know of her from The Wizard of Oz, but she once encouraged, I love this quote. She once encouraged, quote, always be a first-rate version of yourself instead of a second-rate version of somebody else, end
Mhm.
quote. Judy was, among other pursuits, a singer, actor. How might that quote speak to your experience, whether in your career or your overall life, please?
Wow, I'm so thrilled that you saved a question like this for me. That is amazing. And it's a really good question. And it did stop me in my tracks when you told me that you were going to ask me this question. So, but I had to think about it and how and reflect on how it resonates for me. And I think I'm going to start with the second part, which is the second rate, being a second rate version of someone else.
Sure.
Um, that means that you're seeing the outcome, right? You're looking at the success that you perceive that the person has and the broad acceptance that they might have. So, maybe you aspire to have their talent or, but it's the recognition of that talent that is, that makes you want to um, that makes you want to what's the word I'm looking for?
Emulate.
Emulate them.
Yeah.
Um, and that you're aspiring to having that, that's defined for you,
Yeah.
the success, right? And being a first-rate version of yourself in reality may mean that you're not always going to be very well understood
Mm,
or liked by people or have that measure of success that you see there.
mhm,
Being a first-rate version of yourself, and I've definitely seen this both as a nonprofit professional and as a singer, can be very, very challenging when you're in environments where value generally is often defined by the number of people in your audience or the number of people who stay for your set
mm.
or the number of people that you can please or that you can keep pleased.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's challenging. And yet I've learned that in situations where I've tried to use others' definitions of success, I've just shown up as a second-rate version of myself.
Okay.
I've just wound up not being more of the person that I should be. They've made me smaller and less and
Mm,
less of what I could be.
mhm.
So your definition of success, I think, has to match the first-rate version of you
Yeah.
and not of somebody else. Like it's never going to look like that.
Yes.
So those are the thoughts that I have about that. It's a great question.
Yeah. And I think, thank you. I think some of those sentiments tie into what we just talked about, where staff aspire to manage or they want to run the department. And it's like, and as you said, like you are seeing the recognition, the achievement of the work they put in, and people are trying to emulate, but maybe it's not true to you. Like not everyone is meant to be a manager or, the vice president of advancement. Well, thank you for your thoughts. And this is our last question here. We have about 5 minutes left. And given who you've been in our profession and the changes you have seen technologically and with prospect development becoming more of a integral part of overall fundraising, I'm very curious to hear what excites you as you think about the future of prospect development. Is it the technological innovations? Is it trends? And you talked about some of those trends earlier in the conversation. Is it having more people, the energy of a younger generation of prospect researchers, prospect managers coming into the industry, developing a stronger community, whether that's at the local Apra chapter or internationally? Anything come to mind as you think about the future?
It's the thing that I think about a lot right now is I mean, I'm old enough to know when HTML was new, right? There was this transformation of printed information from analog to digital, and then it had to be instrumented so that it could be available to people on the web and through the web,
Yes.
right? And that took about 12, maybe 15 years. And I remember in the early days when people were like, I don't understand this. I don't know what this means, right? What is this going to do now? Oh, we're not going to be able to, researchers are not, right? So there's,
Yeah.
so I'm looking back at that transformation and I'm thinking, you know, there's a transformation that's obviously happening with artificial intelligence and those tools, but lately I've been thinking back to the days when we moved into the first generation web
Yeah.
and how long it took for those things to happen and to sort of seep into our workplace and into our cultural imaginations and our industry imaginations.
Mhm.
And um, I, I guess I'd like to think that this process with artificial intelligence is going to have that same kind of a progression. And it's pretty remarkable that in our lifetimes, Tim, that we have seen that one digital transition and another one, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of professionals that are still working, right? And are experiencing both of those, right?
Yes, totally.
So, and the books have yet to be written about it, and they'll probably will be. But it's back then there maybe wasn't as much hype because there weren't as many like channels of
Right.
people like hyping at you all the time, we've come a long way in our jargon and our hypeability, but I think that's what there's an internal transformation that is going to happen, and it will take time,
Yes.
right, to sort of sort itself out. And at the end of it, the prospect development teams will be different, but they'll still be around, right? We're just trying to figure out what they'll be, but we can't really know that yet, right?
Yes.
We can just accept the fact that they'll be different.
Hmm.
Um, and it will take time for us to understand, what the first rate version of that will be,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
But it can't be, anything but hopefully we just don't want it to be a second rate version of anything, right? We want to work always for the first rate version of that, right? And to
Yes.
always look for those changes that are coming at us with what's the highest and best use, of it,
Yeah.
against what we're already doing, right? And to think about it in those terms. So I guess that I would say, am I excited about that? I think what I'm really excited about is, um, and what I'm very hopeful for is the ability of prospect development professionals to help organizations elevate the conversation in the right directions,
Mm.
specifically around thinking about our data as real assets and real representations of the relationships that donors have with our institutions that transcend and outlive all of us, right? And preserve and protect those, and understand our ability to be able to use those to make meaningful, take insights about who our constituencies are and where they're going and how we can, further, create a relationship with them to sort of lean on that. And then also the subject matter expertise that I think prospect researchers are really poised to do, which is to begin to really more deeply understand the worlds of affluent individuals, ultra wealthy individuals, how they're marketed to, how they create and manage their wealth, right? What the industries that work with them set them up, the expectations that they're set up to have, and how we internally as fundraisers, work collaboratively to look at our donor bases through those lenses and understand them in ways that are really strategic, really, really more aligned with the kinds of donors that they are and the people that they are, and really increase the meaningful relationships that we have with them, because otherwise I think we'll be shuffled out of
Right.
the conversation,
Yes.
right? And I worry about being shuffled out, and that's not the direction that we can go. So so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about being somebody who is, in the conversation, giving us an opportunity in this transition to have the conversation around some of those really, basic ideas and questions. And it's those kinds of things that are going to lead into what prospect development becomes.
Hmm. That I love that response. Thank you. And I think there's a lot of really good insight into both what we can continue to grow and contribute to our organizations, but also that warning of, if we don't do this right, if we don't treat the data and the people behind the data, our constituents, our donors, then that's not a direction we want to go in as a profession. So thank you for that. That's well stated. Well, Valerie, this has been just a really delightful conversation. I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I really enjoyed it, Tim. Best wishes to you.
And you as well. Thank you. I look forward to hearing more of your insights on private equity and alternative investments on LinkedIn. And if there are other vehicles in time that you choose to share those thoughts and insights, that would be really good. And I look forward to supporting those as I see them.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Once I get going, I'll be sure you'll be one of the first people I let know. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. And on that note of gratitude, thank you to our audience for supporting people in fundraising through reactions, reposting, commenting on posts. You'll see Valerie's conversation later this fall across various channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, the audio video component of the interview, Podbean, which is just the audio. And thanks to my 100th guest, Luis Diaz of WISE, and the Donor Participation Project, who sponsors my website, peopleinfundraising.wordifysites.com. So all those channels to hear Valerie's insights. And I look forward to staying in touch, Valerie. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Bye-bye.
Bye.